Hi, I'm Jenna Flanagan, host of the WNET Group's award-winning multi-platform news magazine, Metro Focus. The WNET Group is home to Channel 13, America's flagship PBS station located in New York City, and 13 airs Metro Focus 7 nights a week. Now, on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for joining us for Close to Home town halls on housing equality. Each week, we're gathering with frontline thinkers and doers to examine an array of complex topics like housing and economic justice, food sovereignty and security, homelessness and community, cultural displacement, and media narratives about housing. The summit will present frank talk about issues and solutions with an understanding of history and eyes towards the future. Close to Home is taping live every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern from April 26th to May 24th. Learn more at 13.org/close to home. Tonight's program, More Than Shelter, a town hall about homelessness and community, is presented by the WNET Group and Chasing the Dream, our national multi-platform reporting initiative that explores inequality, opportunity, and justice in America. You can watch the programs produced by Chasing the Dream at pbs.org/chasing the dream or at youtube.com/onthebrinkpbs. Please subscribe. Now, part of our station's mission is to provide meaningful experiences to our audiences and communities, to educate, entertain, and inspire by bringing together leaders who are at the front lines of creating equality, and we hope Close to Home will provide new perspectives and ideas for strengthening and enlivening all of our communities. We will have time for audience Q&A towards the end, so as you watch the live stream, please post your questions in the comments section. And please join us again next Wednesday for part 4 of our series, The Roots Run Deep, a town hall about culture and displacement. I'd like to thank our promotional partners for tonight's episode of Close to Home. We're grateful for the support of Ida Young Center, Ali Forney Center, the Brooklyn Movement Center, Low Income Housing Institute, also known as Lehigh, and Music Kitchen, Food for the Soul. Last, a very special thanks to WNET's 400 plus community partners. Their input has shaped our thinking around this topic and many others. A quick reminder that the views expressed by tonight's guests and attendees are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the WNET Group. And now I'm pleased to introduce WNET's Director of Community Partnerships and the curator of Close to Home, Brian Tate.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and welcome everyone. I want to begin by paying respect to the Lenape people, upon whose unceded and ancestral homeland lies the city we call Manhattan. Please join me in making this affirmation from a place of deep humility and solidarity with an ongoing commitment to racial justice and decolonization. I want to also acknowledge the continuity between our being here today and the struggle for liberation and the full expression of our humanity that has transcended generations. Many lives have been lost in that struggle against forces of racism, fascism, xenophobia, and hate. We hold all those people close, and we honor them when we gather across communities to speak truth and create change. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the third week of Close to Home town halls on housing equality. At the start of each event, we present a performance by a gifted spoken word artist or musician to help gather us across this virtual space and remind us why we have come together to have these tough conversations is for the culture. We're thrilled to have with us someone very special to kick off tonight's digital summit. Please join me in welcoming the founder and director of Music Kitchen, violin soloist and chamber musician, Kelly Hall-Tompkins. Her musical collaborators tonight are sopranos Allison Charney and Adrienne Danrich, violinist Hector Falcone, violist Andrew Gonzalez, and cellist Peter Seidenberg. They are joining us from the Centennial Memorial Temple at the Salvation Army headquarters in Manhattan, where they will perform two pieces, Gretchen's Threads, composed by Kelly Hall-Tompkins, and Music is Love, composed by Paul Moravec. Everyone, please welcome Kelly Hall-Tompkins. Everyone, you can learn more about Kelly at her website, kellyhall-tompkins.com, and discover the work of her organization, The Music Kitchen, which brings uplifting live music to homeless shelter populations at musickitchennyc.org. Kelly, thank you all again so very much. Everyone, please join me now in welcoming tonight's incredible panel for More Than Shelter, a town hall about homelessness and community. I just want to mention, week one, we started 2 weeks ago with a really knockout conversation, the cost of living around housing and economic justice. And just last week, we had a powerful conversation called Circle Made of Soil about food sovereignty and security. And we hope you'll join us next week for The Roots Run Deep, a conversation about culture and displacement. Tonight's conversation is very special to this discussion about homelessness and community, and it could not be more timely. I'm going to introduce everyone. I will not read their bios, but you can find their bios at 13.org/close to home. And a direct link should also be in the chat where you're watching. Remember that the panel will be taking your questions as well, so please post them in that same chat. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Antonine Pierre, Executive Director, Brooklyn Movement Center, and my friend. It's wonderful to see you again, Antonine, always.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to everyone who is joining us for tonight's conversation. I wanted to start just by naming, folks have probably heard about Jordan Neely, who was a 30-year-old performer who lived on the street in New York City. And this past Monday, May 1st, another rider on the F train put him into a chokehold that tragically ended his life. Unfortunately, Jordan's is only the latest life lost to the system. And so I'm asking that we all hold a moment of silence for Jordan and all victims of the violence and injustice of homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonine. Let me now introduce our panelists for tonight. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Sharon Lee, Founding Executive Director, Low Income Housing Institute, also known as Lehigh. Sharon, wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Imam Omar Nais of Jamiatu Ansaruddin.
Thank you, yes.
Imam Omar, it's wonderful to see you. Sherry Reimers, member of the White Earth Nation of Ojibwe, Executive Director, Ain Young Center. Sherry, we're very happy to have you here.
Manin, bonjour, hello.
Alexander Roque, President and Executive Director of the Ali Forney Center.
So wonderful to join you today.
Thank you, Alex. And Donald H. Whitehead Jr., Executive Director, National Coalition for the Homeless. Donald?
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
You bet. Thank all of you for being here. Antonine, I turn it over to you. Everyone, remember to post your questions in the chat. Look forward to a great conversation. I'll see you in about an hour.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of our illustrious panelists who are joining us tonight. Again, as Brian said, my name is Antonine Pierre, and I am the Executive Director of the Brooklyn Movement Center, and I'll be moderating for this evening. I'll be moderating this conversation for this evening, and I do mean conversation. So we've got this brilliant panel of housing advocates who are here to help us understand how we can address individual and community housing needs. More Than Shelter is the name of the game. How do we solve the problem of homelessness with solutions that address not just the whole person, but the whole society we envision for ourselves? I also just want to do a quick note on language before we move on. During this conversation, you will hear us use terms like homeless and unhoused somewhat interchangeably. how we use language is always shifting, and I really want to set some expectations of our intent, which is to center the dignity of people in crisis while focusing on solutions. So I really want us to just jump in and get started with what is at stake. So Donald and Alex, I would love for you to answer this question, which is, I want to start with the strangulation death of Jordan Neely on the New York City subway 9 days ago. There have been attacks on people experiencing homelessness before, but this may be among the first that occurred in such a graphic and public manner. If the killing of Mr. Neely is part of a trend against ensuring unhoused people are treated with dignity and as a part of our communities, how did we get here and where is it taking us? Donald, could you start?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. And thank you for acknowledging Jordan's untimely death. It is unfortunately a trend that we're seeing across the country. We're seeing people, their response in communities to homelessness being one of victimization, villainizing people for their experience with homelessness, and actually communities, even some that we would consider progressive, criminalizing homelessness. And I think that particular issue really sets the tone for how people are being treated in community. So we've seen across the country these raids, I call them raids, some people call them sweeps, where people experiencing homelessness are moved from one place to another because of their homelessness. And the most important thing to know about that is it doesn't end homelessness. So it sets the tone for people to treat people that are experiencing homelessness as other, as less than, as people who, if we talk about it in the terms that these communities are using, people that can be swept. And we know that what we sweep is trash, and we sweep leaves. These are human beings. And this is not a solution at all to homelessness, but it does set the tone. We've heard from the mayor of New York that, people should actually step in when things are happening on the train. And so this is what happens when people step in without the proper training and de-escalation or crisis intervention. We can't have people in the general public doing this. But the bigger issue is that this will continue to happen until we treat the issue of homelessness like an emergency and we provide resources at the level that is large enough to address the problem. We have never done that in this country. A few times we've increased resources and we've reduced the problem, but that has not happened for 40 years. And that's why we see this growing number of people living on the streets and people being criminalized.
Donald, I could not agree with you more. And the disregard for human lives that we experience, the societal rejection of folks who we believe are less than. And I have to say, to the question of how did we get here, from my perspective, we arrived here, I firmly believe, from a political environment in 2016 that led and shepherded in this emboldenment of hate. It gave permission to hate in a very public platform. There's been a significant increase in identity-based crimes and hate against people. And you can pin it back to how our country changed in just the very common form and decencies of politics. And there's this disgust almost in this permission to hate. And from our work at the LA Forney Center, we really focus on finding pathways and finding solutions and dignifying homeless folks. The antidote of the disregard and the othering of homeless folks is actually empowering and connecting with immediate services like direct cash transfers and housing first approaches. And I find that in our work and in work across other providers that we're connected with, the value that is given to homeless individuals is really as the extent of the compassion and the potential that they have and that we can promote and support.
Thank you so much for your responses. And, we want to continue in this vein around dignity, right? And this question is going to go to Sherry and again, you, Donald, which is, I think anyone who has supported a family member or a neighbor through a mental health crisis can relate that someone like Mr. Neely was someone's nephew, someone's friend, someone's loved one, someone's son. And so the question I have for you is, what is at stake at the intersection of these violences that are so intertwined with housing, specifically mental health, incarceration, and substance use? And Sherry, will go to you first.
Well, we see it every day, even within our supportive housing, and it's lives. Lives are at stake, futures are at stake. And when I think about our young people, I think about, how it's disrupting the cycle, or, it's continuing the cycle. There's no services that are adequately funded to provide the prevention that we need, but it's really stake. It's really, it's lives. We see the uptick in suicides. We see the uptick in drugs. We see the uptick in violence. And it's getting wearing, it's really wearing on, staff and community.
And I would certainly agree that what's at stake is life itself. One other issue that we didn't introduce into the conversation that I think certainly has impact here is that the population of people experiencing homelessness has changed dramatically. We now have a racial equity issue, if you will. There are more people of color experiencing homelessness than their portion of the population. So African Americans represent about 13% of the population. They represent about 40% of the homeless population. So I do believe that the othering started 40 years ago when we start seeing a larger number of people of color that were in the homeless population. But life itself is at stake, and we have to do better. We have resources. We're in the richest country in the world, and so it's a matter of making sure that homelessness and people experiencing homelessness are as much of a priority as anybody else. The one thing we know about Jordan Neely's situation is it requires structural change to fix. There were a number of different systems that failed this young man, from the criminal justice system to the mental health system to the foster care system to the homeless system. Unless we interject the resources that are necessary into structural change in all of those systems, we're going to continue to see this cycle, and it impacts everybody in this country. So people should understand that when people are living on the streets of our country, when they're being used as fodder for political gains in this country, it really destroys the fabric of our country, and generation after generation, children who become homeless adults. So we got to really get to the structural roots of this system if we're to solve it.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to actually throw a follow-up question to you, Sharon. What I really want to try to get at, that Donald, I think you were starting to talk about, is really just how these different issues intersect and how they're completely enmeshed. And they, when we're talking about a homeless population, we are talking about a population that is facing issues at so many different intersections. Could you just share a little bit more about how you see that, how you see these issues being enmeshed?
Well, I think there's this, first of all, cynicism that we see in society, almost like, oh, we're never going to end homelessness, right? And that is really tragic, because we know real live examples that we can end homelessness for families, for singles, for people living with disabilities, as well as, young adults. So we know that there are solutions that are very effective, but what you see raging in the community sometimes is this dichotomy. Oh, why are we building more shelters when permanent housing is the solution? Well, yeah, permanent housing is the solution, but it may take years to get permanent supportive housing. So in the meantime, are you going to let people just die living on the streets? As an example, over 300 people have died living on the streets of Seattle, King County last year. And that is a huge jump from before. So we think that it's so important that people be brought indoors, out of the rain, out of the snow, out of the, the trauma and violence of living on the streets. And there are cost-effective ways of doing that, right? And just because you don't have enough permanent supportive housing doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. And so what we're doing, we're seeing people being swept, but where are they going, right? Are you offering them a safe, warm place? Or are you sweeping them from one sidewalk to another sidewalk, to a park, to a bridge, to a on-ramp, off-ramp? So I think there are some communities that are making really, I think, poor policy and funding choices, because we know that there are very practical, cost-effective ways to end people's homelessness.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing up, as Donald did earlier, this concept, this governmental concept of sweeps, right? And how dehumanizing it is. And so I really want to get into really the lens with which we view homelessness. And so this question is actually going to go to Imam Omar and Sharon. And the question is, there's this false dichotomy that pits my safety against your rights and needs, right? And we know that getting unhoused people their needs makes all of our neighborhoods safe. So if you could tell us just how the public health issue of homelessness has become one of crime and public safety in the public eye. And again, this is for Imam Omar and Sharon. And Imam Omar, please start.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Imam Omar Nias. I am faith-based community leader of Jamiat Ansaruddin. Sister, I heard your question, but my point is like, I'm feel for my heart like I wanna say anybody in the street, I don't like that. I don't like people sleeping in the street. Doesn't matter what, doesn't matter where you're coming from. Doesn't matter what nationality you're coming from, because I've been do that long time ago before this issue opened in 2020. I've been do that. Even I see the young kids, them try to be hanging out in the street, I have to be talk to them, like tell them like you have to be go to your parents earlier, or you're gonna go to your house, because I don't like that to any nationality, any nation for the human being to sleep in the street. I don't like that, because no knowledge in the street, no education in the street, no happiness in the street. The street, only the people they don't have a parents, because that's what I used to tell them. If we need people, we have education, knowledge, smart, you have to be give to them resin in a house before they outside to them. If you don't get the knowledge in the inside, you go to the outside, you're not gonna get nothing.
Well, I think people may falsely accuse a lot of unhoused people for creating a sense of lack of safety, security, criminal activity, right? But in actuality, we see that homelessness is not necessarily a cause for a community to be concerned about that, because we see a lot of homeless people who are actually victims. We see homeless women who are scared to sleep at night because you could just, slice a knife through someone's tent and you can get robbed, you can get raped. I mean, people are so vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. And then we're seeing people who are really frail and sick because they've been chronically homeless out for so long. So one solution we've developed that has taken off from Seattle is the concept of tiny houses. Instead of sleeping in a cold, wet tent, why not give someone a warm, tiny house where they can put their belongings, they can have their partner, they can have their kid, they could have their pet, and be safe. And also, it's not just like, oh, you're safe for tonight, but you're in a community. You're in a community like a village. And there are case managers on site who can help you with housing applications, with healthcare, with employment. And so the tiny houses have been shown to get more than 50% of the people leaving a tiny house into permanent housing. And then additional, people are being reunited with family or friends or in transitional housing. I mean, I think the pandemic has really hurt us. So many shelters shut down, congregate shelters shut down, and because of COVID. But the tiny houses, if you are in a tiny house, you're sleeping, like 2 walls and a door away from the next person. And when you open your door, you have fresh air. So the tiny houses have been really proven to be very successful. And last year we housed over 2,000 people in tiny houses. And those 2,000 people would actually be on the streets if they were not sheltering in a tiny house.
Sharon, thank you so much for taking more than shelter and making it very real. You said the shelters are not cutting it. The tiny houses are where they're at. And what I heard from both of you is that folks who are unhoused are being, that's life. Folks who are unhoused are consistently criminalized, but it sounds like both of you are saying the real crime is the fact that they become unhoused, right? Is the fact that they start to live on the street. So Imam Omar, I would love to follow up with you just on that point. If you could speak, you were talking specifically about young people who end up living on the street. If you could tell us a little bit more about how you see the harms that have been done against them that have them actually ending up on the street. Imam Omar, if you're talking, you're muted. Okay, you're good now.
Okay. I'm basically like the people what I see in the street. I know some of them, some young boy, they don't like it, but they don't have no choice. Because why they don't have no choice? Because they foundation in their parents to have a difficulty about argument, attitude in the house, to try to go outside, to hanging out in the street. But sometimes they don't like it, but they don't have no choice. That's why basically sometimes I see the one young generation speak to them, because I own the little bodega. Sometimes they come in to ask me, oh, Imam Omar, we thirsty, we need a water, we needed this. After me see they sit down in the front of the shop or whatever. I'm try to open the chance for them to talk to them, ask them why you in the street this time 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock, you have to be in your house, you don't go to school. Can you show me your GD? Whatever, they start talking to me, tell me like, okay, my mom or my daddy tell me this, my mom tell me this, I'm get upset. After that, they kick them out for the attitude. That's why I'm saying like we have to be thank God, to pray for the God, to all of them. We have to be know who's the human being, who's the generation human being, because we here to pass for them to get better education, better life. If we here, we see the great head, everything, we know we pass already. We here, but we have a message from the God, from the Allah, to give it to them, to make them have that for them, our generation kids, because we generation our gun. But sometimes you see the people, if the people wanna fix it, good people in a house, example, this house, like a church or mosque or any faith base you believe, we have to be united to open the chance to bring it to the people people coming to us because the people have to get education from us. It's a pastor, church, mosque, any kind of religion you believe, make them people leave that to open. Because if they be open, like example, every time we pray in a mosque, we have it in a mosque. Some people we not believe it's same religion. We have our people, Haiti people, from the Brazil, from the color people, anybody they come to the mosque, but we see them sometime. I have some people from Senegal, we don't have them same religion, but I teach them to how they manage it for some people in a mosque. Them is still there. Now we have to be open, any one of them, to open your chance to make sure the people, if they want to clean from you, they want to get blessing from you, don't close your mind, don't close yourself, open yourself to keep them. After that, God gonna give to you more power to let them direction. I see to myself, since when I'm open the bodyguard, I just joking with the young kids, 14 years. I don't know them parents, but I'm talking to them in the store, talking to them nicely. Tell them, okay, if you go to the school, you find out your GD or your high school diploma, I'm gonna give you the money for you to celebrate. They do fast 2 years, 3 years, they come and tell you like, oh, I have in mind, because that's making me feel so happy to keep the people for yourself. That's what I see.
Thank you so much, Imam. And, you really set us up for this next question, which is actually going to go to Alexander and Sherry. And so both of your organizations provide shelter to young people whose safety and civil rights are already at risk because of who they are. So what can you tell us about the trauma that can drive a young person to homelessness, which the Imam was just discussing a bit of, and how they are impacted by being unhoused? And Alexander, we'll go to you first. Matt, you're muted.
Thank you so much. I have to say there's something fundamentally distorted when you are homeless because of your identity, because of who you are, because of things you cannot change. We work with young people who are rejected by their families, thrown out into the streets because they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. Young people who are to rely on their families for care and support, and whose families have turned their backs on them. And tragically, once in systems like foster care or other homeless providers, also face a great deal of homophobia and transphobia. And it's a othering and a brokenness that follows you where you don't fit into a box. Our young people fit into the LGBT identity world separately, fit into the homeless world, and the intersection of the two don't meet. And it's tragic. And what we find is that when you are so fundamentally disregarded, abandoned, neglected, and hated because of who you are, sadly, there's a host of mental health issues. In fact, LGBTQ young people are 8 times more likely to be homeless than non-LGBTQ youth. And once homeless, they're 8 times more likely to experience mental health crises, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. And it is a very devastating and very sad experience that kind of is an outlier within the homeless systems. And I'm grateful that there's space to discuss, and truly, in addition to the supports that have been mentioned by Sharon and Donald and so many others, we also have a very strong and steadfast commitment to mental health and the recovery of self. So it's even a greater onus on the holistic approach to care, particularly for young people.
Yes, the American Indian community, I heard Donald mention the disparities there. For us, we're 1% and 2% of the overall population, and we represent between 17 and 22% of the homeless youth. Actually, the homeless, houseless is what we call it, houseless system. And, a lot of that begins with substance abuse, whether it begins with our young people or within their family, physical and sexual abuse. is some of the top issues that we see, we hear from our young people. And then some of the, a lot of those youth are those exiting foster care, the foster care system. A lot of them are exiting early. Runaway and homeless youth, the runaway and homeless youth that we work with. And, a lot of the issues that we hear from our young people is not being heard in the system. Their voice doesn't matter. I once had an elder tell me that when youth go into foster care or into the system, that their spirit is left behind. And that's really true. We see that, we hear that. And so we do a lot of work really trying to bring that young person and their spirit back together. When young people, they believe they have the independence to survive on their own, but they really have a beacon on their head. We have the predatory practices that are happening out there, the predators that are really seeking out these young people, looking at their vulnerability. A lot of our homeless youth will be on the trains, they'll be in the libraries, in the skyway system. And we have individuals that are out there just seeking out our young people. And they're unaware of, the darkness that awaits them. And, trafficking is something that has really become really major. It's a major issue here in the Twin Cities and across the country. And, so I think of all those things. And so we have programs in place that are here to really, reach out and get out there and locate our youth, our vulnerable, unoccupied or unaccompanied youth, and, getting them into resources right away is a challenge.
Yeah, Sherry, I want to add there's this just staggering statistic around homeless youth. There are findings that more than half of homeless youth are propositioned for sex within 72 hours of being homeless. So when you think about like the homelessness, you've just become homeless. For our young people, it's family rejection, failures of systems. So you're dealing with that trauma, you're dealing with how to survive the streets, and now you're negotiating whether or not you're going to sell your body and what that looks like. For us, about 90% of our young people have sold their bodies to survive. So it's just, I had to respond to what you're sharing there because the numbers always shock me, even though I've been stating and reviewing them for years. It's just devastating that this is a reality.
Well, and I would say it's in upwards of 98 to 100% of the youth that we serve have been sexually exploited.
Wow, that's devastating.
Yeah, thank you so much for just getting into, again, I think that when we think about folks who are houseless, thank you, Sherry, for again updating our language here, that again, we often are only thinking about housing, and you all are really just helping to richly help us understand that there is a state of life that folks go into when they're living on the street or even couch surfing, right? Like houselessness looks a lot of different ways. And, a question came up for me, Sherry, as you were talking. And so I want to note to folks who are watching us on Hopin, if questions are coming up for you, please get them into just submit your questions, because there will be a Q&A section and we do want to hear from you. And Sherry, I would love to hear, I think that the healing work that you all do really gets at the intersectionality of these violences that we're talking about. So could you just say a little bit more about your wellness model? Because again, I think people think that you just want to get folks into a house, but it's so much more than that.
Well, it really is so much more than that. And it's deeply rooted in reconnecting our young people with their cultural connections, first and foremost, with their traditional values. We really tap into our community to teach a lot around the traditional and cultural teachings. We also, I know we were talking about, some of the ingest work. So we have a Intertribal Youth Action Council. We serve American Indian youth, but we serve all youth, and a good majority not the majority, but a good number of the youth that we serve in our supportive housing are Black youth. And so we started an intertribal youth action council that works collectively with our government systems and policy. This morning, we started our day off at a press release. One of our young people here was part of that press release. Will be on the news tonight to talk about his experience. And what I found is we're really empowering our young people through the use of our cultural and traditional practices, but also engaging them in systems to make change around the criminal justice system, around health, the health equity, and really hearing the youth's voice, not somebody prescribing what youth need, but the youth telling them what they need and getting them involved in jobs and training. We just had the director of our second largest county in our building yesterday to give them a cohort of jobs at $18 an hour. And then after that cohort is done, it leads to a fellowship for another 10 weeks. And, the young people are shaping those conversations with our government systems and our policymakers.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is for Sharon and Imam Omar. And, we've been getting into identity and homelessness, right? And so you've both talked about the isolating aspects of homelessness, especially among immigrant communities. So what are some of the factors you've seen that cause homelessness among immigrants? And what can be done to counter that isolation? And Sharon, we'll start with you.
Well, as Donald said, people of color, BIPOC folks are overrepresented in the homeless community. And you can just imagine in the traditional shelter, I'll give you an example. In the traditional shelter system, the sort of like the old days, but it's still around, the women will go to one shelter, the men will go to another shelter. And if you're in a family shelter, many of them will not take teenage boys 13 and over, right? And most of them don't even take pets, right? And then, of course, some of the other like sort of religious faith, you have to be married, you can't bring your partner. So what you could see is that many people are avoiding traditional shelters. And that is terrible because there are very few choices. So we're seeing lots of people sleeping in their car, or families are in vans. And of course, there's also RVs. And that's part of the reason why we developed tiny house villages, because you can keep the family together. Your pet is special, your possession is special, your partner, right? And that makes a big difference in terms of a sense of community. But it's not just like you're in a tiny house by yourself, right? It's a shelter situation. But the case managers are on staff. And then you don't have to hunt around for laundry. There's laundry service, there's bathrooms, there's kitchen with running water. You can, freezers, refrigerators. I mean, it's almost like a village setting, right? And then there's a code of conduct. And people actually, part of the healing process is to be in community with other people. So we actually have a village for homeless women and same-sex couples. And we have a village that focuses specifically on Native American, African American, and Native Hawaiians, and Native Alaskans. And then we also have a separate village that is focused on, like referrals from BIPOC organizations. And because we know that culturally appropriate services and a sense of community is really needed. So we can tailor, we can tailor like enhanced shelters or villages specifically for certain populations.
Great, thank you. And for Imam Omar, I just want to repeat the question here, which is, what are some of the factors you've seen that cause homelessness among immigrants, and what can be done to counter that isolation?
Okay, Basically, like that your question is about people in coming to this country. Before they came to this country, they don't know nobody. They don't have nobody to come to this country. Like a better example, like to I copy some knowledge from my father, my sheikh, big sheikh. This name Al-Hajj Abdullah Inyas. He's a father, the one who created the association what I have, organization what I have in America. His father, like my grandfather, is the one who created Jamiatu Ansaruddin. Jamiatu Ansaruddin is a basically long time ago, like 100 years ago, but my grandfather created that for help the human being. He talking about in his book, he have eyes to what he see to the people, what he see to the human being. You cannot see the human being like that to hate them. You have to love them always. That's why basically, like if the 2020, I see the people in a train station, I see them to call them in a mosque to talk to them, but the more important to the homeless people in a shelter, that's language. Language is more important for the you speak to them, they understand what do you say, they understand what they needed. That's more important. I see the lot because I see a lot of people they came to the shelter to try to know English or Spanish or whatever. They don't understand nothing. You see them outside, ask them, why are you sleeping here? They tell you exactly, I go to the shelter, but I don't communicate with them because the problem about the language. That's the more immigrant homeless, because that's a shelter, they needed any kind of language to help them. Because the people, if they're thirsty or whatever, like example.
Oh no, Imam Omar, it seems like your audio is cut out a bit. Could you try?
I don't understand. I don't hear you.
There we go. We can hear you now.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm apologize because sometimes the people calling phone too many times. Basically, like what I'm trying to say, like the important this is the language. Because some people they go like example. I have so many people to come to the mosque to want to go to the shelter. If the mosque is full of the people, they go to the shelter. But they have a problem for the communicate in about language. Also, they can say something good, you think it they say bad. The shelter, they're gonna tell you something good, you think it's something bad because they communicate a different language. Also, they don't understand that language. They're scared to left their shelter, go to the street. Also, they feel so sad to come back to you, to tell you like the shelter they not keep me, whatever. That's why I see basically that's what I see the point. Immigrant, they have a lot of immigrants that try to be homeless. They communicate in a society that's like that. That's why sometimes I'm bringing a lot of people. Because why I bring a lot of people? If I see you, I know your language. Imma, you speak Arabic, or you speak Wolof, or you speak Hausa, or you speak the language what I know. If I'm talking to you, I know exactly why reason you're sleeping in the street. That's why I keep them sometimes.
I just wanted to add a quick footnote to that. We actually, because of the large immigrant refugee population in Seattle, we do have one village where we focus on immigrant refugees, and we contract with the Refugee Women's Alliance for case management services. And I know there are questions about how do you keep a village safe. We have a really nice residential fence around every village, and we have a security pavilion. And evenings and weekends, we have 2 people, 24/7, awake staff. And so the villages are actually very, very safe. We make sure that, intruders, unwanted guests do not come in. And then we also have developed in terms of what Sherry was talking about, we developed a village for the Puyallup tribe. And then, so they have graduates of their, behavioral health, drug, alcohol program. And the village is there for unhoused members of the tribe. And then we also just developed a new village for Chief Seattle Club, which is another Native American organization. So we think that the concept of a village adapts really well to immigrant, refugee, and BIPOC populations.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sharon, for that clarification. And I just want to name that we've been, if you've been following along, you want to orient yourself where we are in this conversation, right? We've been talking about houselessness and what is at stake, right? And now, we've heard a lot, particularly about how identity really impacts how people's experiences of homelessness, and also the support that they can actually count on and get from our systems, the current systems that we have. And so I want to start to ease this conversation into a place of, well, why should this matter, right? Like, why should I care? If I'm on Hop-In, I'm like, what's going on? Why should I actually care about this? Although I have to assume if you're here, you maybe already care. And this question is going to go to Donald and Alexander, right? So I'll say that as a New Yorker, as a born and raised New Yorker, when I see unhoused people on the streets, I am always confronted with my personal responsibility and its limitations, right? And so in this society, in this failed system of making sure that everyone meets a baseline for survival, what is the responsibility of our government, right? What are they getting right and wrong? And what do you see the responsibility of the private sector in supporting the solving of these problems? And Donald, we'll go to you first.
Sure. Now, those are big questions, and but I think there's some answers. I think one of the things that's been lost in our society is care and concern for others. And there is this idea that if I reach out and help someone, then I lose something myself. So there's this idea of a zero-sum game, that if I am willing to reach out and help another person, then I lose something myself. We could talk about it from just the financial standpoint. The more people that are inside in housing, and whatever kind of housing it is, not only do we have the option of tiny houses that you've heard a lot about, but there's adaptive reuse of housing. We have so many abandoned buildings in every city in this country that we could really start to address the problem of homelessness in a dramatic way if we were willing to do something that's a lot less expensive. If we take abandoned buildings and we reuse those buildings, we redo them, we could really go a long way towards solving this. But when we put people in permanent supportive housing, for instance, we cut down on the use of emergency services. We cut down on the use of the criminal justice system. So there's a cost benefit for communities, because when we start to house people, less of our tax dollars are used for those emergency services, and we can use those for other things. And when we're practicing criminalization, one of the things you heard a lot about Seattle is an example of a place where hostile architecture is a really big thing. So we build services and structures to keep people from sleeping outside. And there's an enormous amount of taxpayer dollars that are being used to do that. So government has the responsibility of caring for everyone in this country. We heard in the very beginning at the Declaration of Independence that we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't pursue happiness under a bridge or in an abandoned car. You can't pursue it when you're being victimized on the street every night. So it is our responsibility. Housing should be a human right in this country. It is in most developed countries in this world. They've signed the Declaration of Human Rights. We haven't done that, and we need to do that. So we have both a responsibility from the federal government And we have a responsibility as individuals to be able to care for those that can't care for themselves. Now, not all homeless people are people that can't care for themselves, but as developers, as landowners, we can just be so rich. Housing costs have increased 18% year over year from 2020 to 2021. If we were just okay with being able to survive and not being so worried about our own state, that we allow people to be able to thrive. Most people in this country pay more than half of their income for rent, and that's not acceptable in my mind in the richest country in the world. And I could go on and on, but I want to give Alex a chance as well.
Thank you, Donald. You know, it's interesting when you talk about the cost and why should people care, in addition to being human, in addition to building a society that we want for ourselves and our future, in addition to caring for those who may or may not be able to care for themselves, the personal impact, you know, it costs in New York City, it costs $91,000 a year to put someone in jail. It costs over $77,000 a year to put someone in a mental health hospital, which is what we're seeing a significant increase happening now. It costs less than $55,000 a year to house a young person in a shelter for a full year of care and services. And when we look at, you know, our response as people, there are many factors that come to the table. And kind of answering the questions backwards, you know, the response of the private sector is to fill the gaps where the government cannot. And we are all at the benefit of that. There's so many parts that we benefit from, homeowners associations to different private communities that we have and private places that we experience in our world, and parks that we have in good zip codes. And those are all things that we influence with the power of our voice, the power of our funds, the power of our voices. And it's so there's this need for this pivotal shift that we start thinking about how we care for people in that way, right? We make decisions financially of where we want to live, of what places we want to visit, of the neighborhoods and the people we associate with. We're voting with our money there. We're making those decisions as taxpayers in our political systems. And as it relates, and that is the influence that we as a private sector have, is to influence the political systems to take note of the issues that are important to us. On the government side, you know, I have to say, I grew up in the system. I come to this work as someone who's been the benefit of organizations like the organization I work for today, and I've self-diagnosed myself with chronic optimism, and I believe that our government is doing a lot, and our government is, you know, needing us to help them understand what needs to be done better and differently. And I approach my work in that way, that no one really wants to do harm in the government's eyes. It's that the systems that have been built before them and the systems that they know how to build are just constructed in this way that is damaging. So, you know, I believe that the government's responsibility and what they do right is that they are building systems, that they are investing, that they're finding ways to try to invest. It might take years and years to come together, but something is being done. And I believe that the partnership of the private and public sector is where we put our resources. And it's almost, you know, a calling for all of us to abandon, you know, as we started this conversation, to abandon our prejudices and you know, the preconceived notions we have of folks, and to come together to help and make a difference. And there's so many examples of that in our world.
Thank you so much, Alexander. And I really appreciate where you're going here, because we are going to start talking about our vision, right? Like, what are the things that we want to create? Before I jump into the next question, though, okay, audience, hop in family, get your questions in, because we are going to be transitioning into question and answer section. We absolutely want to hear from you. And so as we get into this question about vision, this is actually going to go to Sherry and Imam Omar. And the Brooklyn Movement Center, the organization that I work at, released a public health policy report in April of 2022 called Invest in Black Futures. And this report envisions a world where Black and Brown neighborhoods are fully funded to address the social determinants of health. We're talking about housing, education, employment, all of the things that make it so that we can be healthy individuals in healthy communities, right? that world, MLK would call it the beloved community, right? And so my question to you two, again, Sherry and Imam Omar, is what does it look like to create a future in which all people are safe, healthy, and free from racial violence? Oh, and Sherry, please start.
Yeah, I'm struggling with this. It's really a loaded question on so many levels, because it really, to create a future, it's to be housed. I mean, that is that should be everybody's given right, is to be housed and safely housed. And it was mentioned earlier about decreasing all those disparities. Everybody deserves to have healthy futures, not think about whether they're going to live or die tomorrow, or taking that choice upon themselves or someone else taking it. And when I think about creating a future, I think Alexander just talked about it, everybody, putting aside their prejudices and everyone coming together with a collective perspective. I mean, I sit here and I look at Minnesota right now, and it's them versus us and us versus them, and trying to decide on, some major investments, that would disrupt the cycle. That truly, like in Minnesota, we have one time to really get it right. I mean, with what's been happening in the world with COVID and the uprising here in the Twin Cities, our homeless community is more visible than ever. And those are people that are suffering, and nobody deserves to suffer. And I think if we can really put our heads together, with our policymakers, with our community organizations and communities abroad, we can really make a difference. But it's a bold ask, and the biases are still there. But I think Alexander really hit the nail on the head, and it can be done. I mean, we've seen it done in smaller communities.
Thank you, Sherry. And Imam Omar, same question. What does it look like to create a future in which all people are safe, healthy, and free from racial violence?
Okay, that's a good question. We must come together to read our mind, to help people who need help. Number one. Number two, we have to be help with this housing in the community. All of them have to be come together to clean their heart, because a lot of ignorant things they're coming up for the community or all over the world. We have to be put ourselves down to level with the people. But the generation right now, what I see in myself, I see a lot of people, ignorant things are coming up, because any one of them thinking you better in your other one. That's the problem. Number two, we must together to help people who need help, because a lot of them, help is not about money. Help is not about housing. Help is not about food. Help is everything for a human being. If you see somebody to need to cross the road, one break or whatever, something try to break the leg, you stop them. You see that somebody, like example, somebody want to cross the road for the lot of traffic, you stop the traffic, let him go. That's a help. That's a food. That's a help for the life. That's make the people feel like we unite, we together, we help together. We have to become one, like a one team. If not, they're gonna be difficult for our generation and the next generation, because people have to be open their mind, open their heart to love one of them. Any one of them love people, to try to be. We must come together to help people who need help. Because if they like a Quran, if you got Allah say, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu in tansurullaha yansurukum wa yusabbit aqdamakum. If you believe God, you have to be helpful to people. To God gonna help you more than in anything. If you see there's some people you the better in them, give it to them what you can give to money, housing, mind, sense, everything to give it to the people, because if you give, God gonna give it to you. God gonna give it to you back. One by one, day by day, noon after noon. Assalamu alaikum.
I just have one other thought too. I really think when it comes to homelessness, there needs to be a retreat that includes, I don't want to get into politics, but I really think there needs to be a coming together that they need to sit down and listen and talk. I say that need and I say that softly, because I think if we could understand each other's differences, that would be part of the beginning of resolution. But, you have people that live in suburban homes that, they've never been homeless. They've never received services, and they're making the decisions for our communities, for our states. And I just think there is this bias, there's this ignorance, and nobody wants to learn. You kind of think about, Dr. Seuss and the Sneetches, right? And it's how it is in the political front. And how do we get our community together to listen and really truly understand homelessness, right? We're all just a few paychecks, or some of us a paycheck away from being homeless, or a death or a loss within our community or in our personal family can set us over the top and into homelessness. There's so many variables that people say it can't happen to me. It can happen to every single one of us, depending on where we are with our mental health and, our financial status and all of the above, including those sitting, in the suburban houses and thinking it can't happen to them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sherry. I think this is actually a really great setup for our final question, which I'm going to ask everyone to respond to. And for ease, we'll go in alphabetical order by first name. So Alexander, you'll be up first. I think that gives us Alexander, Donald, Sharon. Oh, nope. Imam Omar, Sharon, and Sherry. And so this final question here, I think relates to what you were just naming, Sherry, which is that, very often doing this work for the greater good does not protect us from the direct impacts of these broken systems, right? And so as we're transitioning into audience questions, I'm going to ask folks to just briefly answer this question, which is, in a word, like, doing this work is hard. So what is it in the face of that hardness that compels you to continue the work? And again, we'll go to Alexander first.
For me, it's the promise for a better tomorrow. It's part of a self-healing journey. It's also part of a privilege to be able to do good in the world. And I think it's a privilege, and I'm honored to have this privilege. So it's where I gain my privilege.
So I'll jump in. For me, it's a pretty easy answer. I've experienced homelessness myself twice. Once as a young person, I lived doubled up. And then as an adult, I had a period where I experienced homelessness myself. And I received a lot of really warm care and support. And I want to be able to give that back to people. And I know that the many, many possibilities people have once they're able to get through this brief period and situation. So I want to be a conduit for that.
Thank you. And Imam Omar, you are up next, then Sharon and Sherry.
Okay, this like your question, like what I said to the Quran just now, that's something, because that's Quran say, who you believe of you help, because of Allah, He help you and make you stronger. Because that's why I keep that, because since when 2020 I start this, my belief, my happiness to my heart and myself, I'm happy to do that many more since when I'm still alive. Second times, like I, if you do good follow with you, you're not gonna be tired for do good because you do one 5, 10 coming up, you do 10, 20 coming up, you do 20, 30 coming up. That's making me feel happy. If I sit down sometime in my house, in a mosque, I see the 10 people coming, say to me, Imam, we don't have no way to live. I'm happy to say to welcome, to bring it the food, bring it to eat, talking to them. Look like I see my family just now, to making me feel energy more than in I don't see no people. That's what I say. Yeah. That's what I said earlier. My father is Alhaji Abdullah Nyas. He teaches us like love the people. Love it, love it, love it. If we used to be sit down with him since when we young, he see the people, he don't know where they're coming from. He put all of them same together, eat, drink, sleep. That's making me feel energy. I grow up with that. That's why sometimes people tell me like, oh, I want to go find out the job. I want to go do something.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Imam. I want to make sure we get to questions for time, but thank you so much. I want to kick to Sharon and then Sherry.
You're welcome.
Well, my parents were first generation immigrants. And when I was a teenager, I was thrown out of the house. And then my mother had to leave, my brother, my sister had to leave. So I have this deep commitment to house homeless young adults, as well as homeless families and other people. So I believe strongly what Donald said, that housing is a human right. And because I see positive solutions and progress being made, I am truly hopeful that we can solve and reduce significantly the plight around homelessness.
And I think for me, I'll be extremely brief, is seeing the resiliency of our community and really, the resiliency of the team, that we work cohesively shoulder to shoulder to get this done. And we have individuals that have worked for our organization. They have been homeless youth. They have been through all of our programming. They work for us. Some of them are directors and leaders in our community now. And, when I see, the resiliency through story and the journey of our young people, that's what keeps us going, And today at the Capitol, when we did a press release, one of our young people here asked, he volunteered to tell the press and tell everybody about his journey in a good way and how it's helped him, And so when they're able to tell their story, I know that we're doing a good job, and that keeps me going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sherry. And this is actually leading into some audience questions. We're going to do 2 audience questions before we close. Again, panelists, we are trying to get some things in. So I'm going to ask folks to keep your responses concise. And this first question is actually going to go to you, Alexander, which is, what stories or perspectives about homelessness need more media attention?
I think an earlier point was made about the voices of the individuals we care for being prominent and centered, and there's also like not wanting to exploit and not wanting to make the folks we care for uncomfortable, but there are ways to get around that. There are ways to center voices, and I think the stories that are important to be told through their experiences is where humanity is needed in this work, where the shreds of humanity that folks are dying for are necessary, and also the real stories of their lives are important to share. Like, how do we end up here is I think will help to build a greater connection and a better perspective for people.
Great. Thank you so much. And to get to another question that we received, and Donald, I'm going to ask you to answer this one, which is,
Sure.
I've read that the private prison industry is the single most powerful force pushing for homeless criminalization laws nationwide. Would the panel comment on that?
I would certainly agree. I know there's more research to be done, but there is a group of hedge fund operators called the Cicero Institute, and they're basically presenting legislative language all across the country. I think they've introduced it in legislation in about 13 states at this point. There is a tie with this group to the private prison industry, and it's the first kind of organized effort we've seen to make the case that people should be in prison versus housed. So that is a true statement that there is that group of people who would benefit from people being criminalized, actually promoting the idea of people being criminalized. And again, it's a revolving door for people. They go to jail, they get ticketed, they come back out of jail, and they're not eligible for jobs, they're not eligible for housing. So it exacerbates whatever value that people see in this. There is no value. It exacerbates the issue of homelessness, and the people behind this are the same really, really well funded organizations that fund private prisons. That is absolutely true. There's more evidence that needs to be presented, but I fully support that idea that that's who's behind this. And again, 13 states have seen legislation to the point where, really quickly, I'll say, in Tennessee, there was just a law passed that makes it a felony with up to 6 years in prison for being homeless.
Oh, Donald, thank you so much for bringing not only the answer to that question, but just the fullness and richness in terms of the background.
Mhm.
And there's a question, Sherry, that I'd like to kick to you, and then hopefully we'll have time for one more, and then I think we'll be closing, which is, so this is to you, Sherry, which is, what kind of practical education is available to help remove the stigma of villainizing folks who are homeless or unhoused? And this person continues, they say, I was assisting a young person one day and witnessed firsthand the repeated rejections as he attempted to receive assistance.
Mhm. Again, I got a difficult one. I hate to ask you to repeat that again, just so I can kind of break it down.
Yeah, no problem. I'll start really just the question, which is, is there practical education that is available to just help remove the stigma of villainizing folks, right?
Right. Well, I think about, where I talked about there has to be more story. We need more story of individuals and telling how they became homeless. What were those foundational pieces that impact their journey? And I think the more we can educate our the lawmakers, I'd like to think that would have an impact. I know in Minnesota right now, lived experience, the voice of lived experience is really big in the lawmaking here. I don't know how it is across the country. And I just think that, to me, that's the core. And I don't know if the other panelists here feel the same way, but it's educating the community. When I think about, I did a lot of work with homeless adults and detox intervention, and I got to learn that they were first-line paramedics in the Vietnam War. I got to learn that they were accomplished pianists. I got to learn, that, all, these incredible strengths and gifts that they were given. And that helped me understand them closer. It brought me closer together with those individuals and the work that I do, and understanding why they are suffering in the way that they are. And, how can we listen more? I think listening is really important. So, in education is just, if your neighbors, it's listen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sherry, because you're helping us end this conversation, sort of a full circle moment. We started this conversation talking and really centering the killing of Jordan Neely and really talking about, well, dignity, right? Like, what does it mean to address the problems of homelessness with dignity? And so, you know, to this person, I really want to say the practical education is get outside and look a homeless person in the eyes, right? Acknowledge their dignity, acknowledge their humanity, get to know people beyond the ideas of someone being a criminal. And so that is it, folks. I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists. It's been really lovely being in this conversation with you. And I believe we are kicking it back to Brian.
Thank you so much, Antonine and panel, for that dynamic conversation. I just want to extend a personal thanks to each one of you, Donald, Sharon, Imam Omar, Sherry, Alex, in addition to Antonine. Wonderful to have you here. And a very, very special thank you to Kelly Hall-Tompkins for that powerful performance at the top. It started us in such a great tone. On behalf of everyone here at the WNET Group, a big thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Please come back next Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, when I will be moderating The Roots Run Deep, a town hall about culture and displacement. Learn more at 13.org/close to home. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll see you next week.